Yeah, okay. Gracias, Andrea. Thank you. Let me share screen here. Okay. So, March 7th, as y'all know, thanks for coming out. I'm going to pass it to Mika. So get us started with a land acknowledgement and then ground us, get ready for the day.
Oh my goodness. Okay. So yeah, I've been thinking over the last few hours since Marianne asked who can do the land acknowledgement, and I raised my hand and figured, okay, and been thinking a lot about what it means to acknowledge the lands that we're on beyond what feels like a regurgitation, knowing that we're on Cheyenne and Ute and Arapaho Nation lands, and trying to ground in what it means to me to arrive here and be able to make home here. And it felt appropriate to share a little bit about what is going on in the homeland that I came from. And then I thought, wait a minute, which homeland do I come from? My great grandmother was born in Ukraine, which was Poland at the time, and was expelled during pogroms. And my family was welcomed in Canada on lands that did not belong to them, on native lands north of Montreal. And my mother had stones thrown at her when she was a kiddo on the way to high school for being Jewish. And so she decided to up and move to Israel, which is occupied Palestine, where I was born and raised. And last week, there was a pogrom in Palestine where Jewish supremacists attacked the village of Hawara. I don't know if anybody's like following on the news that's happening over there. I follow closely. And I decided promptly to leave after my military service, realizing that I was serving in a supremacist colonial army, and bounced around the world and lived in all kinds of places, and finally made my way here to Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Ute lands. And I don't know exactly what it means, to be honest. I just kind of sit with the complexity of it all, of what it means to make home with the people here on the screen, essentially, is I feel like what we're doing together. And I kind of want to bring in the fact that we belong to a global moment and a global movement of people who are looking for ways to call where they live home and make it a better place on a local and global scale. And so I think that's what I want to share with today's acknowledgement, to breathe that in, that there's, I think a lot of us come with a lot of complexities with our families to this part of the world, to the foothills under the Rocky Mountains, and that it's not simple what we're doing. But I think we commit to doing it in mindful ways, and we commit to doing it with love, and we commit to doing it with justice, and we commit to breathing into that complexity. And I hope that that's okay with everybody this morning, because it's no small thing, the mountains we're trying to move. So if we can all take a moment and breathe that in. 3 big breaths for the people that came before us. And another breath for arriving today, for the people that are here with us. And another breath for the people that are going to come after us. Thanks so much for letting me do the land acknowledgement today. I'll pass it back on to you, Ali.
Thank you, Mika. Thank you. Let me share again. Okay. So that's per usual. Meeting communications and roles. I'm going to be the main facilitator today. I will admit that I will probably be doing a lot of talking at the beginning. Feel free to interject with questions, but we do have it set up so that at the end, there will be lots of times for questions. So don't worry about that. Just remember.
Hey, Ale,
Yeah.
sorry to interrupt, but Andrea had said that she could complement the land acknowledgement really briefly. So
Sorry, thank you. I did not see that.
I know it's in the chat and you probably have multiple screens up.
Yeah, go ahead, Andrea. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Mika. I want to say, good morning to you all again. And thank you for, bringing this up. That might be the reality, not only to you, but to many of the people that are, don't know exactly what the relationship may be here. And I just want to say that usually, when you don't belong to these lands and stuff like that, like you said, you honor your ancestors too right now, because you're coming from your ancestors that also have, a story of massacres and things like that. And the relationship to the land specifically here is because of the blood that has been shed precisely into these lands on the way that, the settlers have done that. And so the relationship to the land is a way of respect to the blood that has been shed and trying to be erased, right, with the erasure history and stuff, and with the understanding, as you said, Mika, that you have lived that too through your lineage. So I think it's beautiful to try to find the correlation and without being dismissive or anything of the reality that we continue to live here. So that's in short and brief the explanation, but it's related to the relationship, right, that especially indigenous people carry with this land, with the blood that we have sacrificed, offered, to these lands. There's ceremonies that are particularly for that, in creating relation to the land like that. So just want to say that. Thank you.
Thank you. And welcome to Gary and Julie. Y'all are stepping in here. Okay. Love getting the multiple perspectives. So yeah, just back to meeting roles. As we know, create space, take space if you're not usually used to taking space, create space if you tend to take a bit more space in other places. As always, this group is about, addressing power dynamics if we can. We're going to get into that a little bit later about creating better spaces where power dynamics are just kind of built into the structures of the meetings. And as always, since I will be sharing screen mostly, if people can help me out with the chat, that'd be great, as you all have done. Thank you. So getting into the agenda, the steering committee has been meeting quite a bit recently just to work with Michelle to take in the recommendations, to really start applying them to what the CJC is, coming up with ideas for advancement of growth, of structure, of purpose, really. And so today we're going to go over a lot of what that work has led to. And then for a solid chunk of today, we're going to go into breakout rooms for you all to really be able to ask questions, provide feedback, and go from there. We'll come back. We'll reconvene as a group, kind of do a recap, and then, as always, we'll go over what's coming up next in the future. So with that. Okay, so steering committee updates, essentially, trying to see where we're at here. As I mentioned, so really overlooking the overarching vision that we have for the CJC. I think the words that came up a lot in our group was this idea of feedback cycles, of mapping and developing a system that really sticks to our mission of creating spaces that are focused on community leadership, really dictating and getting connection into institutional backing. So essentially with the 3 spheres, the idea is from the community end, map out not only like leaders and work that's already being done, people that are trying to do the work but maybe have barriers, establishing and learning what those barriers are, and then providing that feedback into the CJC that can then pass it along to our institutional end, where they're also doing somewhat similar work, but just on that end, where it's mapping out who's doing what, seeing where resources are, connecting people in the community to really the people that can help them make things get done on the institutional end. At the same time, we've been learning a lot about what are some of the institutional barriers that keep us entrenched in the systems that we're at, and provide that feedback towards the community. In essence, we have people on both ends really trying to do things, and a big part of what we feel like is the lack in ability to do the work that we want to do, to advance climate justice, to advance really community-led and empowered projects, is that lack of relationship, is that lack of communication and accountability. So through the CJC, through that really the community end of establishing a greater sense for what is needed in the community in terms of like what barriers need to be addressed so the community can do what the community needs to do, we can really advocate and work with people on the institutional end to address some of those barriers, recognizing that leadership in our community is really where the juice is here. This is what we're trying to empower, what we're trying to move forward. So with that, we've been working a lot with Michelle's beautiful work plan. That was really just a compilation of all the meetings, the retreats that we've had, one-on-ones with people, meetings with steering committee. And so Michelle did a great job of just kind of putting that all together. And then with the steering committee, essentially giving us all time to, what's the word? Kind of make the plan our own. And so I'm gonna jump into that now. If anybody has any like brief questions right now, we can talk about them. But as I said, there's going to be a lot that's going to be discussed right now, and the pieces are going to start to make, I think, a little bit more sense as I get towards the end. And then once we get into breakouts, it's really going to be a time for you all to ask questions. But I don't want to stop y'all from asking questions right now if you need. So 1 second here. So in essence, I guess I'll go to, this is the full work plan that we've all been working through. I'm pretty sure most, if not all of you have seen this. And as you can see, it is very in depth. It has lots and lots and lots and lots to do. We didn't think that, it's possible to really go through every single item today. But what we did do, and I think this goes all the way down to, 108 different line items, mapped out all the way until our mission 2030. Obviously things are going to grow and develop as we go, but thanks to the work that we've been doing, I think we've been able to really narrow down some priorities. And so that's what this second page is, this priority snapshot. And just so you know, kind of the key here is, and I know spreadsheets can be a little bit daunting for people, so please tell me to slow down if you need me to. But right here in this priority sphere, so you can see the colors. So for community, everything is in blue. So that's this first section. For what we're calling right now the CJC, which is just the middle sphere essentially of the CJC. This is really all CJC work. But the green part is just that intermediary piece that is that connecting piece between the two ends of the community sphere and the institutional sphere. And so we have a set for green, and then we have a set for red here for institutional. And I think I'll go through them just to give you all a general sense. These were picked out from the primary overview that all the tasks, and we determined that these to be essentially the most important, or at least most encompassing pieces of each of the spheres right now of the general priorities. So on the community end, we're going to have essentially this idea of supporting community groups and organizations aligned with CJC. Part of that is also coming down here at the bottom is identifying leaders and groups who need to be at the table, who aren't here right now, and finding ways essentially to establish a relationship with them, try to use funding when possible to enact on projects that they're doing, so that then we can really see it's like, oh, well, here's this person, here's these groups, they're trying to do this amazing thing. All of a sudden we see this pattern of certain barriers that are arising, and then we can pass that information along, and that'll be kind of the theme here. And then another piece is through that is also trainings. Looking at community is wonderful and amazing, and they always want to learn, and I appreciate that. And so part of this is identifying what kind of trainings, what things do they want to learn, creating the space for them, creating a platform for them to essentially develop themselves. And part of that is in time, is really like inviting people from bigger institutions such as government, such as larger nonprofits, to come in and share with all of us, what is it that you're working on? Are we already doing something similar? Is there ways that we can all collaborate through this process? I'll jump to the institutional end because I think that'll make it easier to explain the CJC part. But the way that we're looking at the institutional end is really this idea of, again, like identifying and building a relationship with governments, with large nonprofits, and then ideally maybe at some point even the for-profit sector, but that's definitely a few years down the road at this point. And then strategically integrating them into the CJC, figuring out ways that they can align with our mission, identifying barriers for them, identifying who are the people that are already aligned with our work, but could maybe use some help doing the work inside of their institutions. And then also, of course, learning what it is that they're already doing, what resources they have available for communities, what partnerships they're willing to make. And then through our already deep connections with community groups, we can facilitate that relationship as easy as possible, and also ensure that accountability is being met there. Andrea, real quick, I see your hand.
Yes, just a clarifying question, please. So what I heard you saying is that CJC is planning to also give workshops to the people, or are you going to be the liaison to get the resources for the community organizations to give the workshops to that? Because I'm hearing two different things, and I think I'm also unclear a little bit of like specifically the mission and the vision of CJC, which I understood was more like the role of the liaison in between the government and institutions of the second part that you're referring to, instead of actively doing the work in the community.
Right. So on the community end, it is more identifying and establishing relationships. And in terms of trainings and workshops, I think that's all a level of also identifying. It's like, who's already doing these workshops? How can we get them to more community members? As much as what we do, it really is more of that, like getting people who are already doing the work, the tools they need to do more of the work. If that makes sense. Does that help to answer? So I would say like it's a little bit of both. I mean, we look at the ACT workshop, that's like something that the CJC can offer, but there's already so many countless other workshops and trainings that community-led groups are doing that we can also help to promote. And essentially we can try to envision more like this is like it together with those community groups, be like, these are the people who need to be in those trainings, and finding ways to get like to make them aware of the trainings, to get them to the trainings and things like that.
Yeah, I think I just want to be careful with, the line between appropriation and not is very, very fine. And especially because CJC is coming, regardless that it's a really well-intentioned institute, organization, still coming funding yet from philanthropies and the city as well. So that manages like, the dynamics of us having to really be careful where we are not going to appropriate any of the work nor take over the work of community liaisons in order for CJC to shine. Does that make sense? So I just want to be really careful of the language that we're going to be using, because how I was hearing you understanding it could be just how I'm hearing you understand, saying it, because I cannot read the slides because I'm on my phone. I'll be transitioning to my computer in a second. But, just to be careful of like, let's say, a committee 9 to 5. They are doing a really amazing job with the water too, and they are doing a lot of community work and things like that. How to empower them, like you're saying, without having to be CJC, the one that is going to be taking on to do the workshop, but their organization is the one that continues to do the workshop, and CJC is going to be the liaison to provide the resources in between, the city and kind of like developing of trust. I just want to make sure that I'm understanding that's what we're talking about, because that's what I see the liaison to be like here.
Yeah. I mean, specifically with that example, I would say, like, with our relationship with 9 to 5 and their fantastic workshops, and then they, we can learn from them, and they can tell us like, hey, we want to keep doing these workshops, but this is in our way. And then what we can do as a CJC is determine, do we have the power? Do we have the relationships? Do we have the capacity to help them overcome that barrier so that they can keep running the workshop, getting to more people, and advancing the work? Does that make sense?
Exactly. Thank you. So as I said, we just need to be really clear on the language and how we're using it, because otherwise it can be confusing and threatening for some communities.
Can I jump in with a few things? Thank you, Andrea. I think we need to actually put that into the work plan. So we don't really have something like it says support community groups and organizations aligned with CJC. We need to just specifically say like we will amplify and help get like the word out to workshops that are being led by other groups. And then the second piece, it does say entrenamientos para nosotros, so it's trainings for us. So the second one was trainings for the internal CJC group. And that gets to the last piece that I wanted to say, that the way I'm envisioning the spheres, especially with the community side and the institutional side, there's sort of the people who are already in the group. So there's an internal community side. And there's an external community side, which is other community organizations that are doing work that we are wanting to support, but may not have like, you know, a member in the CJC. So there's like internal and external. So I think you're just speaking to some of the clarification that needs to happen there. And also we'll make sure to add into the work plan something that's very clearly like supporting other groups in their trainings and workshops.
Yeah, thank you. And absolutely, this is what this time is for. I think we've sensed that there's a bit of confusion around what exactly do the three spheres mean, like who's in, who's out, what is the CJC? And the steering committee, essentially, we got together and we really tried to figure out for ourselves, like, you know, what does this mean to us? And so now we're hoping to give that opportunity to you all, just after going through a lot of the, I don't want to say wrestling that we did with this, but just the work we did to understand the purpose for all of these activities, essentially. And I appreciate, Andrea, because I think what you bring in there as well is a bit what the CJC intermediary pieces. And I would say again, I don't know if CJC is like how we're going to land on it, because this is more the administrative end and the governance end of what this whole big group is. And the idea there is like, how do we structure ourselves so that we aren't leading ourselves towards appropriation? So we are continuously, you know, helping to develop this platform for these community-led groups, while building relationships with institutions, but making sure that the power dynamics are addressed and nobody is essentially taking power from the community, being extractive of the community, but rather feeding into the awesome leadership that is already there. And so part of that is, you know, when community members bring up and tell us about these amazing stories, we've realized it's like there's not really like a good space already as is that keeps track of all of these things, that keeps track of, you know, what are the big barriers to this work, what are the stories of work that's come in the past, and then keeping track of this so that other people in the future and around us right now can learn, what have community groups done in the past, how have institutions helped or hurt that, and then they can figure out where they fit into the larger scope. Obviously, you know, dealing out funding and making sure that people are getting compensated for their time is a big part of that. And yeah, I think the biggest one for me is just like, how do we find channels for flow in terms of leveraging resources from those that have the major resources to those that can actually do something with the resources on the community end. So with that, I'll invite steering committee members, Michelle as well, if you have anything to add to this piece. After this, I think we're going to get into, I forget what was part, but go ahead, jump in, anybody, and then I will move us along.
I could say a few more. Oh yeah, go ahead.
I'll just briefly, Andrea, thanks for the clarification. Absolutely super helpful. The idea is to find out what community organizations are up to and where they can be supported and amplified, not to become the McDonald's of social justice. Like, no, not our role, not the thing to do. Platform to uplift, not take over. And I also just want to take a moment and a deep breath and say, ta-da! And thank Michelle for all the really good work on this work plan and the detail for helping each of us kind of understand our role a little better and diving a little deeper into like this is what this means. If this is the mission, it breaks down into these spheres, and each sphere breaks down into these tasks, and to understand what the work plan actually means for the steering committee is super. So just thank you so much, Michelle.
Yeah, I also want to thank you. Hopefully the work plan also, it's a place where you can see how the three spheres are working together. Hopefully the work plan is a place that helps you get a better sense of what the CJC is doing and focusing on. For example, for this year and the next few years, there's been a lot of conversations about, like Andrea just said, what exactly is the mission and how does this organization work? So this hopefully supports gaining clarity. Hopefully it gives sort of marching orders and is a place where the whole group can come and say, like, we're moving on these things. And like after today, no one's going to be like, why did we have working with community blah 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 in here? You know, hopefully after this point, there's a lot of clarity in what's being worked at. And then I think the other two big pieces for me about the work plan are seeing how much is on here and who is doing the work, and also having places where people can jump in. And I feel like especially on the institutional side, for folks in institutional, you know, representing institutions and governments, to go through that piece and say, okay, where can we lend support and where can we do some of this work and keep driving things forward? Because the way that the work plan is now is not exactly sustainable. You know, there's like too much work for too few people. So this is a place for you all to jump in and say, where can I support? And even if it's not something that is prioritized for this quarter, you can say, oh, you guys have this piece in quarter 3, I can help you get started. Right? Yeah, so hopefully after this, you all feel like this is your work plan and you can see yourselves in it, and what you want is reflected in there and anything you don't want is not. So please take some time with it, review it as a whole, but especially review the piece that is yours. And then we'll be able to finalize it and say, this is really what we're doing. This is really what CJC is doing for the year and beyond. So yeah, hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, and I think, you know, like what I was saying here in the chat, Micah, like the acknowledgement that you just gave, and always like, you know, like I have seen per se when the spectrum model was presented, was mentioned who made it, right? Who was the one that was able to acknowledge that is so crucial, especially in this community where there's a lot of predator behaviors coming through, you know, from city government models. We don't, in order for us to create trust amongst the community, we're going to have to disrupt that paradigm. And this is what I'm talking about, the language, that it doesn't need to be centralized into the CJC and what the CJC is doing. And I'm going to give a really quick example about that, right? Like, so for example, Naropa was really trying to collaborate with Harvestable First Nations. And I told them, let's try to see. And they say, well, how we can make it be that, you know, we can be on your website. I'm like, well, we're going to have to collaborate and build trust. And they're like, well, can they promote your video, Voices of the Land, and this and that? I'm like, let me see how you're going to promote it. Because if you say the student that, you know, is here at Naropa and built a Harvestable First Nations, you know, like organization and stuff, and they're taking the credit, like if I was made by them. I wasn't made by them. The knowledge that I carry was already there. And if they didn't give me the knowledge, yes, the professors helped me a lot to formulate certain of the languages and learn more. And I really appreciate my professors. But Naropa as an institution actually gave me a really hard time in many other levels. So I didn't allow them to say, you know, appropriate the work that I did, taking credit of what I was doing, because that was not the reality. So when we use the language, we need to be really careful how we use it and how we use it to empower their communities, not appropriating, not taking, and acknowledging where it's coming from.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Okay. And I think another key point here is that you know, kind of to what Michelle was saying, it's like this is for us to make our own, ways to people to find ways to see themselves in the CJC and the work that we do. Because in part we kind of acknowledge, that it has been a lot the work of a few, and there's so many amazing people here that have this desire to step into either like new roles or already have fantastic expertise in certain things that can help just to build the structure of the CJC, so we can continue to create that platform that just builds and provides our leaders with what they need to overcome some of these barriers. So yeah, and thank you for that chat there, Michelle. Francie, yes, please.
Yeah, I have a quick question. Can the current vision of the CJC be reshared, or like current? Because all these activities are really helpful, but people keep saying the work, and it'd be helpful for me to read the CJC vision to really understand how me representing an institution can best support like what the work is. So if that could be shared, that'd be helpful.
Totally. And I will say, so that's in the breakouts, we're going to take a deeper dive into that. I don't think we have anything written down right now to share immediately, or at least that would be easy to find.
And it's not a mission and vision, but I had started to write up some stuff to support CJC communications, including a possible website. So it's kind of long, but I could give you this piece that has the background that as we look for mission and vision, and that's if the steering committee is okay with me sharing it.
Is it the Mighty Arrow blurb?
Though it's edited again, and it's called a CJC overview. CJC overview com draft from Mighty Arrow blurb.
I mean, I think it can be a good like starting point. Because it is, yeah, because Michelle's done a bunch of work and really gotten to know what the CJC is working towards. The steering committee has done a bunch of work. And we recognize that some of you all just haven't had that time to really kind of embody the feeling of what we're doing. Because sometimes it is a little bit difficult to put into words. So thank you to Michelle for putting that into a statement there. But essentially today is really built around, like Francie, you asking that question and getting the opportunity to see where you dive in. We're also going to have retreats and deeper dives, and this actually gets into the next bit of the presentation around how we're actually going to move forward with this, and what the steering committee is envisioning for a shift in the CJC structure, essentially. So I don't know, I have a slide, but essentially just says proposals to shift CJC council structure. I'd rather see all y'all's beautiful faces and talk to you. And essentially, thanks to, in large part to Michelle's really kind of, coming in from having not been in the group for a while, and then really seeing the way that we're working, and then the steering committee also coming to consensus around this idea of everybody's in this council right here, right now, is kind of trying to do a little bit of everything. And we haven't been able to really refine roles, priorities for like individuals and just general branches of the CJC. Part of that has also led to I said unacknowledged imbalance of power within our group, and that hasn't really allowed our community members some more of the space to really speak on their own terms. And so what we're envisioning, and this is just more of an introduction than a proposal really, is moving towards a bit more of a functional model, ideally centered around the needs of the community sphere. And so in the community sphere, we would have people who aren't members of these larger institutions, especially government, coming together, identifying, how to go about doing this work plan. And really, once again, with the focus of connecting to community so that we can figure out ways to lift them up to do the work that they're already doing. I think like many of our community members have always been, coming back and being like, oh, what about this cool project? Or what about that cool project? And so giving them their space, that platform to, on their terms, essentially create the work that they need to do. On the other end is the institutional end, which also has its barriers, also has its opportunities. And so we figured that it would be best to let that group kind of focus on its own, and have, given the fact that each institution really has such kind of varying needs, they're all at different stages, it might be better to just address those bit by bit, rather than necessarily trying to amass everybody and work on every single institution in the same exact way. And then once again, bringing back this idea of the intermediary of the CJC, helping to establish some of that structure, record keep, and hold to accountability. Part of this would essentially be moving our council meetings to more of a functional meeting. So rather than doing kind of what we're doing today, where it's like this check-in where people haven't had time to do some of the work, and then people are essentially left to try to make decisions on the spot, we have more functional meetings that are more focused, and then move towards like keeping our retreats as spaces where the entirety of the folks involved in the CJC work are brought in together to discuss things. So that would be really more like refining a bit this community council, essentially, and having them meet as regularly as they decide they need to meet. And then on the institutional end, as I mentioned before, individually going about and working with those folks as needed, and then coming back together in the retreats. So Andrea, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, no, I was catching up here with also with the chatting and stuff, and maybe, I hope I didn't miss this, and please forgive me if I did. I'm just wanting to know also, what is the strategic planning for reaching out to communities to actually ask what they need, right? Where is the biggest lack of need? Like, let's, if we go back and learn from the experience with what happened with the funding with Mapleton and other organizations that were trying to apply, with the mobile home parks, which I think it was an amazing thing, that the outcome that came out from that was beautiful. And the support that CJC provided was amazing, and it wouldn't be able to be produced without it. And the discord that could have caused amongst other communities, and wanting to learn, how do we learn what are going to be the needs from the community organizations that are trying to be supported without assailing anyone, and being in a fair process on understanding, right? Like investigating, like, what are the biggest needs, right? So it could be, I think we kind of talked about this a little bit before of, like, for example, we're experiencing a lot of delay from Boulder County because of the rigidness and things like that, and how the CJC can be impacting in a way where processes will be taking on better, and learning what, as I said, once again, like how we're going to reach out to the communities to know what they need, and how is it going to be possible to implement that?
So fantastic questions. And that's part of what we're developing. And what we're realizing is that needs to be developed in a space where it is community members who have direct access, who have direct lived experience, who are most connected to like what that impact would be. And so that's what, like, you know, later on this week, there will be a CJC Community Sphere retreat, and implementing and determining what that plan is, determining what are guiding principles, what are things that we really need to pay attention to. That's where that's going to be developed. So that's definitely the question that we're on as well. So, and yes, we can put it all into the work plan. Eric, did I see your hand?
Yeah. I was asked the other day for, hey, how's everybody doing? I'm sorry, I'm not enough the web and the camera, but you know, and I was asked the other day if we are going to have a web page. Do we have any information for when is that going to be? Because I think that's part of the question for the reaching part, a web page. Is there any, do we know anything about that?
So I think once again, this is another great question. We're gonna get into breakout that we need to ask. And so yes, there has been talks about it. And yes, I think really what just needs to be done is ensuring that as a group, we decide when is that strategically best, what to put on that website. The steering committee definitely has ideas, but you all are the CJC. And so this needs to be done as a collaborative more than just a few. So does that make sense, Eric?
Yeah. So, yeah. So do you have any idea when are we going to start doing that? Or no, not defined yet?
Well, as Michelle's saying, I mean, it is in the work plan. I think it's sooner than later. I think we were talking about this year at some point. I can't remember off the top of my head though, because there's a lot in there. But when we get to the breakouts, we can take a deeper dive into the work plan, and we can actually find that for you. Okay.
Ale, Adriana has her, I don't know if you can tell on the screen, it's a little hard to tell, but Adriana has a hand up.
Thank you, Mika. Adriana, adelante.
Thank you, Mika. Thank you, Alejandro. Yeah, something that I was talking yesterday with a friend is like, we see so many organizations working very hard with the community in Boulder, which is very good in the county of Boulder. But sometimes because we work with community members and families that are that they have like a big need of basic needs. So we have been working toward supporting the community on how to navigate the systems, right? To access resources and things like that. But when we talk about climate justice, what we need is to actually change the systems, not only learn how to navigate the systems. So a big important part of any strategic plan should include like really hard strategies on how can we dismantle the actual system that is creating all the chaos that we see in the environment also. And I have been working with many methodologies on how to do social changes. So I always happy to share with the whole group about that.
And I think this really speaks to what we're hoping to do, right? It's like you and other people like you who have these fantastic ideas, who because as much as this is like about navigating the system towards getting resources, it's really about learning about the system so we can figure out ways to really make shifts in those systems, to really make shifts so that the system, in this case, right, you know, government and larger institutions are really readdressing how they envision, you know, what are the issues that are going on in the community, who's able to fix them, and start, you know, breaking down that system so that people like yourself, people like other people in the council, people outside of the council who are doing amazing work, can do what they need to do. So another reason why when we dive into the work plan here, please, you know, if you don't see something, if you feel like something's missing, and part of that is maybe that some of that strategic vision, this is a great time to do it. There's going to be other times to do it. This is a living document. So please add it in there. That's what we're here for. So thank you. So in that, I'm going to move on a little bit just so we do have time to get into breakout, so we can continue this fantastic conversation in smaller groups. The other bit then is, I think what we're realizing, and it's very interesting, it's been a year since the steering committee was essentially formed, and it's also been 2 years pretty much to the dot since this group here has been meeting. So there was definitely a lot of work that led up to this group meeting for the first time, but here we are 2 years in, a year in with the steering committee, and I think at every stage, right, we've all been kind of figuring out, right, what is the direction, what is the mission, but then also what is our capacity? What are we actually able to do in the moment? What are we set up to do right now? And another part of the conversations that we've been talking about in the council or in the steering committee is that level of capacity. What are we set up to, or what are we setting ourselves up for in the future? And so part of that, we've been talking a lot about a restructuring of the steering committee that is really more of like a refinement of roles, establishing what are the needs, giving people a bit of focus on each piece. Essentially, one person, you know, really dedicated on coordinating that community sphere, one person dedicated towards that institutional sphere, and then one person focusing on governance of the CJC, and then another person really focusing on the administrative portion of the CJC. Through that, we also are trying to work with philanthropies, and I'll invite you, Katie, to come into the space around just what does that mean in terms of, like, you know, funding, in terms of our budget, in terms of what philanthropies can actually provide in terms of honoraria, where we have people who are dedicating so many hours to the work. And also really ultimately thinking long-term, are we establishing something that when steering committee members move on to other projects, when council members move on to other projects, we leave something that is well established so that other people can step in, not have to redo a lot of the work that we've already done, and be able to progress and continue doing and continue with the mission. So with that, I'll pass it to Katie.
Awesome. Thanks, Alejandro. First of all, can we get like some either reaction emojis or thumbs up or celebration for Alejandro for doing this incredible facilitation and really distilling hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of communication and work with his fellow steering committee members and Michelle in her consultancy into what we just heard. That was so complex, but so well delivered, and providing space for voices like Adriana's and Andrea's to say, like, wait, let's, like, you know, course correct, or Caro in the chat. Let's really look at our language, and the openness that you bring in your facilitation to bringing in those voices, recognizing them and saying that there's not only space, but like a real willingness to bring those voices in and then turn it into action and further work together. And so, and I don't know about y'all, but I always feel so comforted hearing Alejandro speak in the morning on a Tuesday morning. His voice is like so lovely. So thank you, Alejandro. And also my second shout out is to all of you, because you know my favorite stat is how many months in succession we've all met, and now we're on month 24. What? you know, incredible. So my proposal that I want to put in front of you all today, and I don't think this is like a decision-making time. Am I right on that, steering committee? This is proposal and discussion time.
Yeah, we're really
Okay.
introducing things.
Great. What my proposal really kind of brings together, it's a specific proposal, but it brings together a lot of what we've just been talking about, and Alejandro planted the seeds. And it really has to do with that showing up that we continue to do and the evolution of the work of the CJC. And so the objective of my quick proposal right now is to share with you a proposal to initiate essentially contracts for each of the steering committee members. So Mary Ann has one as a coordinator, so hers would need to be refined. And then we would create contracts for the other 3 steering committee members. You heard that from Alejandro. I'm just going to go into the quick rationale behind that. Alejandro mentioned it, but from a CJC evolution perspective, we want to continue to move CJC into a solidified platform, creating a strong, sustainable structure to continue to guide and to continue the work. We want to create a system. So even though this proposal is specifically about creating contracts for 3 individuals, including Mary Ann, it's really about creating the structure and a system so that the CJC is well held. So we're talking about individuals, but it's not that they would always be in this role, but we are creating the structure, and they are the ones best positioned as our loyal steering committee member, who, by the way, we decided on the steering committee in April of 2022. So we're hitting a year of this crew working as our steering committee. And so even though it feels individual in this proposal, it's really about creating this strong structure of the CJC that any one of us and future members and folks who are going to be part of the CJC can uphold. From the steering committee's role perspective, part of my proposal is that we really do need to move from an honoraria, recognizing their work in the same way that we're recognizing other council members' work, to a contract and a just financial compensation that more fully recognizes the effort and the time and the skill that they're putting into the work of guiding the CJC. And then thirdly, from the Philanthropies Foundation's perspective, as the fiscal sponsor, we need to, I'm feeling a little pressure from a kind of logistic and administrative and governance perspective to move to a contract and scope of work to be able to justify the amount of hours and compensation that we're offering through the CJC that Philanthropies is providing for these committee members. And Andrea, I'll get to those logistics in a moment. And it's also kind of moving beyond the spirit of it's moving beyond the spirit of honoraria and more like needing to have a more defined scope of work for accountability purposes for the CJC as well as for Philanthropies. So it would help to having a contract scope of work would help to back up the investment that the CJC is making and the check that Philanthropies is writing. So there's that administrative perspective as well. So getting into a couple specifics, I'm not tracking all of the chats, but I think this is going to hit up on some of them. We would be looking at 3 positions. These are not staff positions because these are not full staff roles, because CJ still housed as a project. But the first one would be focusing on fostering and coordination of the community sphere. We're looking at that as an average of 20 hours a week, or a recognition of $4,000 a month. We really think that Iris is well positioned and is already doing that work. Moving into a scope of work and a contract for her would really help to, again, build that structure, bring to life what we're hearing about centering frontline community work, decentralizing the approach and of the work of climate justice, and really having Iris coordinate that those elements of the work plan that we just looked that are related to the community sphere. The second one would be focusing on institutional relationship building and strategic integration, or this like, well, wait, what, like going back to some of the questions that were coming up in the chat or Francie brought up, like, can we get reminded of the mission and the vision and how that relates to the work plan? And also I think we might need to, I suggest we change some of that mission and vision. So who's going to really guide that? And we're really looking at Mika playing that role. It's also, as we saw in the work plan, so important, and we heard this from some of the community members as well, is like, how are we framing the relationship with the CJC and, for example, local governments? And how does the community know about that? How do they have the access to that information and that partnership and those resources and the opportunities that come with it? So we're looking at that again as an average of 20 hours per week and a $4,000 per month recognition for that. And again, these would be built out not in job profiles, but in a scope of work, like we've done for for Michelle with her consultancy. So you all are familiar with that. Oh gosh, I'm probably speaking too quickly for our interpreter. Sorry, Andrea. And so you are familiar with that scope of work. So there would be responsibilities and deliverables. The third role that we're looking at, or third position, would be the coordination of the governance of the CJC, accountability, and that work plan. That would be looking at about 10 hours per week. And we're thinking Alejandro is well positioned for that role. And that's a $2,000 per month recognition. So again, we wouldn't necessarily be tracking hours like we do with every council member, but there's a set of responsibilities and deliverables and a compensation per month. And then Marianne would continue, as Alejandro mentioned, to lead the administration, logistics, and communications. We haven't really talked about this, but my sense is that we would probably continue with Marianne tracking hours, recording hours, and invoicing the CJC. So a couple other logistics or additional comments, and then I'll pause. We are really looking to create these positions or these roles, again, to help solidify, and they may turn into like full jobs with profiles down the road, with probably a more of an outreach for applications. We don't have the capacity to do that right now, and we're not quite prepared to do that right now. And so even though we're looking at these to grow and be longer term roles, we have funding right now for about 8 months to hold these roles. And that's the funding that we have from the initial seed funding, as well as the additional funding that we are gaining from City of Boulder and Boulder County, and hopefully with some more grants coming in and other revenue sources. These would be independent contractor positions. So that amount might seem high to you. Part of that is because there's no benefits involved in these. There's no taxes coming out. This is the gross for them that then they have to pull out all of those elements: healthcare, childcare, transportation, etc. So again, the CJC is not an autonomous organization or institution. It's housed within Philanthropies right now. They wouldn't become, these wouldn't be staff members of Philanthropies. Again, they'd be independent contractors working for you all, working for the council, working for the community, doing the work of the Climate Justice Collaborative. And, as we move towards a more formalized structure of the CJC with human resources and job, like positions and whatnot, that is for the whole council to be working on together. And then finally, I just wanted to give a huge shout out to the steering committee and Michelle, and to all of you who have been, meeting and integrating with the steering committee and the work of Michelle through various channels, whether it's ACT or creating contracts with the CJC, etc. This proposal is informed by lots and lots of overlapping and integrated conversations and work, including the work plan that's been developed. So I'll pause there. That's my proposal, is that we move to consider these contracts for the steering committee members in that way. And again, I don't think this is a decision-making meeting. Andrea had asked when. In my ideal world, looking at that work plan, ASAP, but we use this month because some of us have been talking about this for months, but for some of you, you're hearing this proposal for the first time. And so we need to take the time that we need to take to have conversations, to answer questions, to hear all voices, to be refined. And I imagine we would move towards some kind of consensus that within the next 3 to 4 to 6 weeks.
Can I ask a quick question? Where, so you're saying you're going to be paying the contractors based on a monthly basis, or is it going to be per hour?
My suggestion personally from a philanthropy's position is that it's a contract with a scope of work that has a set monthly amount. And that's what I was mentioning, 4,000, 4,000, 2,000. Right now, Mary Ann invoices, the way we have the coordinator role set up, invoices per hour. And I don't know if we would shift that or not. That's something, but for these new positions, I'd be looking at per month. Now, certainly we'd have to be holding accountable as a council to that scope of work that we would develop together and that folks would be able to sign off on.
Definitely. I mean, I think I have a pretty good understanding because we as an organization, we're in a really similar position and our funding sources are completely different for sure. And just wanting to bring the, I totally get the insurance, and the taxes that are going to be taken out too, that are going to have to pay as a contractors a lot, and just making sure that also there's no taking away from the community work, right? Like that.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah. So where these fund, where would this funding come from to pay for them?
Thanks for saying that. And so we have a really detailed cash flow that I would love to look at with you, Andrea, or anybody you'd be interested in. So this is absolutely considered with responsibility towards the resources that we have and the partnerships and the contracts that we have for those resources. So it doesn't take away, for example, from the commitment to the community work that we have committed within the resources that we have right now and within our work plan and within the structure of the CJC. So that's why right now we have funding really for 8 months, not even really for this end of this year, unless we bring in more funds. And then everything we do is considering a minimum of 40% directly going into community initiatives. With that said, you could consider like the work that Iris is going to do, you know, that's probably bumping up that 40% because she's going to be fostering that community sphere. So that's something we need to look at is what are we considering the work, the community work that the resources of the CJC are being funneled to. But for now, that cash flow takes that into account.
For sure. And I know like philanthropist already has a lot of experience in sponsoring as well. And I don't know what's the capacity of sponsoring actually the CJC where, you know, actually you can offer the benefits. You can offer, right, like things that maybe are not possible. Just, you know, because I'm thinking like, you know, like myself, like, you know, with people that were contracting, they are hurting like right now, you know, with this, with the taxes that they need to be paying. And it's like, you're going to try to be like helping and supporting, and us, we're trying to figure out how to make that better for sure. And like with the sponsorship, I think that there's an I don't know, an alternative where they can take care you know, of the insurance, they can take care of the benefits, they can take care of certain things where they actually become employees or something. I don't know. I know the whole deal.
I think it's a really important distinction. Thanks for bringing that up, Andrea. Right now, our hands are tied at Philanthropies. Our board for a couple of years now has said we cannot bring on other employees in Colorado. We have to focus on building up the Philanthropies organizations in Mexico and Guatemala. So there is not at this time, and I'm not saying forever, but at this time, and there's not an opportunity to bring the CJC steering committee members on as staff members of Philanthropies. And I explained this the other day. I go to battle pretty much every year for better benefits and more equitable positions at Philanthropies Foundation. The Philanthropies Foundation is not the panacea of just and equitable benefits. We have baby steps that we're moving towards that, but it's something that I work on all the time. So the contracts would not be, they would be independent contractors, you know, they get the paycheck from Philanthropies, but the money is coming in for the CJC and the decision for how to make that payment is coming from the CJC. It's not coming from the board of directors of Philanthropies. And so I do think that what Philanthropies has to offer is a lot of work in economic justice and financial health. And so I have it on the docket to ask our financial health team to help to compile resources about individual policies for health insurance, about retirement planning, things like that. We don't even have that at Philanthropies. I will tell you that right now. So again, it's not the panacea to all of a sudden become a team member at Philanthropies. But I do think it is absolutely in the spirit of the CJC and the work that we want to do to provide bridges to those resources. They exist in Boulder County. Sometimes the bridge just isn't there. And then secondly, to have an institution, the CJC, be an institution that's built upon the foundation of just and equitable payment and benefits for the folks that are working with the CJC and for community members who are working for climate justice across the county. So one of the things we've been talking about is like, we know that there are community organizers and nonprofit leaders and folks that are working in the climate justice space and the social justice space as a whole that aren't being paid equitably or fairly. Well, that's a role that the CJC can play eventually within our work plan to draw down funds and to distribute them so that folks doing that work can be paid equitably and have the resources and information they need to be safe and well. For example, you know, you mentioned insurance. So for example, that piece. So there's steps towards all of that, but becoming a team member at Philanthropies is not possible right now. And even if it were, I don't think the best route right now for the CJC.
Yes, and just like know that it's not that I'm trying to question everything or anything like that. Just like I'm talking based on my experience of what we're going through right now with Harvestable First Nations as well.
Absolutely.
And you know, and see how it can be. You know, it's a very interesting dynamic in between not being an employer, though not being able to be an employer yet, and trying to help communities, and you know how to provide what they need as well, and how people are not willing to commit also sometimes fully, and we are carrying the load, right? A lot of the big load because of that, because we cannot insure the insurance or this or that, and like, you know, it's very challenging. So just know that I think that I understand pretty well what is going on, and yeah, just trying to make sure that also there's a lot of as much equity as possible in this process.
Yeah, I think what you're saying, Gary's commenting in the chat. Gary, would you mind sharing that in case people aren't seeing the chat? I think it's really important and a great reflection to what Andrea is sharing.
Yeah, hi everybody. Thanks, Andrea, and I'm really building on Adriana's comment too about what are the systemic transformational work that we're involved in. And to me, compensation is one of the fundamental pieces, right? We underinvest, we basically take advantage of community and don't help them build that capacity. I'm talking about government here as a government representative. And so if we don't build this in, then we will burn people out, we'll lose good people. Government won't truly understand what is the true cost of climate justice and social justice in the community. And this is just the beginning of it, right? This is just a little piece. So I just want to acknowledge that the group, this to me is an example of a systemic change and transformation. So thanks for presenting it.
You all mean aspirationally it is? Like, hopefully that's what we move to, not.
Well, I think we doing this is a model, right? We're modeling to government and to other partners what it's both aspirational and in the current moment, right? We're not just saying we should do this, we are doing it. And by doing it, we are setting the stage for all of our expertise, like that we bring in, that we should compensate. It should be the norm. I don't know if that answers your question, Michelle, but
So thank you. I do want to move us quickly towards breakouts. Mika had one comment and then we'll jump into breakouts. I think like that conversation even there, Gary, Michelle, is like, that'll be great in the breakouts that we'll do. So hold on to those thoughts. And Andrea, I also recognize the question that you put in the chat about what communities will be targeted. Another great question for breakouts. But go ahead, Mika.
I love this conversation. This is the conversation I want to be able to have. Andrea, the experience that you're having with the frontline organizers, just human beings who are showing up in community and not who don't have health insurance is insane to me. I wasn't born and raised in this country, and I'm appalled that this is even a conversation that we have to have, and that it's so difficult to find solutions for it, that everybody I know is calculating, wait, if I make too much, that I'm suddenly not in the bracket to get state health insurance. And then if I, and what's it gonna take to pay for, and my sweetie's now pregnant and we're paying hundreds of dollars on health insurance and still having to pay extra hundreds of dollars for the health care that we receive. And it's an insane moment that we sit around these tables and don't actually acknowledge the differences between somebody who does receive health insurance from work and somebody who doesn't. Like that's a disparity that exists in a very big way. And I think it's important to bring it front and center to our conversations, because it's the foundation that we stand on. It's whether or not we can look each other in the eye and say, yes, we are comrades, we are in solidarity with one another. This is a systems change that we need to figure out. And figuring it out is the key moment here, about like finding the HR specialists and the insurance companies that can help, not just for the CJC figure out. I want to know what it'll take just within the CJC, but I want to make sure that all boats rise with the rising tide, and that I will not look for solutions for myself without looking for solutions for Harvest of All Nations as we go. And that we take care of the community organizations that are in not just the CJC, but like Michelle is saying, the ones internal and the ones external, and on a Boulder County scope. So that's the kind of, I just want to breathe into that for a second, because I don't want to just say, all right, we'll get to that next month. It is a front and center issue. So thanks so much, everybody, for saying yes and nodding for this conversation, because it's a biggie.
Awesome, thank you. Okay. This is fantastic. This is what we're here for. We're gonna go into breakouts right now. It's a little bit tricky in the sense that there will be 2 breakout rooms, and then there will be the main room that we're in right now. And this is so that we can keep interpretation for one of the breakouts. So one room is going to be focusing on the institutional end. So I invite all of our government folks and anyone who feels like they are really representing some of these larger overarching, I guess, institutions to please join that group, and that'll be facilitated by Mika and Michelle. In the intermediary, the other breakout room, we'll have Marianne there facilitating essentially what is the intermediary role for CJC in terms of admin, governance, and accountability. And then in the main room, we're going to keep anybody who is a community member who wants to focus on that community side to stay here, and we'll keep interpretation. So once again, I have just talked a lot. It was a lot. And so we want you all to ask those questions. Be honest. We figured that in breakout rooms, there is more space for people to talk. And so I invite you all to bring up what's coming up for you, and together then we'll come back and chat about it. So I'm going to say reconvene at 10:23. Is that too weird of a number? I want to give a full 20 minutes. And we'll go from there.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. So Marianne, when you are ready. Community side will be Edis and Alejandro. Thank you, Michelle. See you, Lodi. Okay,
Mika, are you staying in the community room? Or are you going to the institutional?
I think he's frozen.
Oh,
What are the translators gonna be here? Okay. Interpreter.
Andrea's here, yeah.
great.
Did something happen? I was just kicked off.
I'm gonna assign you.
Was
Here's-
that what's happening?
Here's your invitation. We'll see you in a little bit. Did you get it? Oh. Not joined, not joined. Bueno,
Te quedas en la comunidad.
a ver, hemos hablado mucho, Iris. Bueno, primero yo quería, a ver, ¿cómo están? ¿Cómo se sienten? Ha sido mucho, pero cuéntame. ¿Cómo andan? Especialmente Adriana, yo sé que mucho de esto es nuevo para ti, pero
Hola Adriana, bienvenida. Te mandé un mensajito para el retiro que vamos a tener el viernes. Lamento que no sabía si estabas o no estabas, pero ahorita que te veo ya sé que estás. Entonces vamos a incrementar la comunicación por ahí.
No, pues
Gracias.
sí pude tener como un panorama general y como me había reunido antes con Marian, pues
Ujú.
sí.
Perfecto. Muy bien. Pues básicamente ahorita vamos. ¿Alguien más quiere compartir cómo se sienten, cómo están? Yo sé que es mucha información. Básicamente esta es la esfera comunitaria y vamos a hablar más de la esfera comunitaria en el retiro. Vamos a crear más plan, más ideas, la estrategia de la que hablaba Andrea ahorita. ¿Qué vamos a hacer? ¿Cómo se va a crear? ¿Qué es lo ideal? Y el alcance que tenemos.